Hello, my name is Jeff Messier. I'm a professor in electrical and software engineering in the Schulich School of Engineering at the University of Calgary. And in this presentation, I would like to talk about how we use the user experience, or UX, design process to develop a data tool for frontline use in an emergency housing shelter. So the whole point of this project was to develop a tool to make data-based decision-making a little easier for shelter staff. Now, in some ways, data-based decisions and data-based decision-making is very well established in most medium to large size shelters. The shelter management and leadership will often take a look at things like, the total number of people staying in shelter per month, the total number of people going through a particular program. And this database decision making tends to be focused mainly on populations. So what are the characteristics of the group of people going through our shelter, and how can we, how would that population or their characteristics be affected by a certain programming change or policy change? The specific goal of our project was to take data and database decision making and move it as close to frontline work as possible. Because of course, once a program is defined, it is implemented by the many thousands of frontline interactions between shelter clients and staff over the period of many days, weeks, or months. And so when we started this process with this goal, we asked ourselves a few questions. The first one was, where might data tools fit into the frontline workflows in order to support and improve decision making? What sort of data is most useful for frontline staff? And what is the format of the data and the user interface of the tool that would be easiest to use? The user experience, or the UX design process, is a process that's very well established in software development and data tool design circles. And it's based on the idea that the best way to design a good data tool is to understand the user's experience. And in our context, a user is a frontline staff person. UX design has a couple different names. It's known as user experience design, sometimes user-centric design, sometimes contextual design. And it was a technique developed in the late 90s and has been refined and used quite extensively since then. And the purpose of the process is basically to start out with a focus on the user and to understand a sort of to get kind of a day in the life perspective for our desired users. And then evolve the process to understand how the particular product that you're designing, in our case a data tool, could fit into the user experience. And the whole focus, the whole purpose of this process is to improve user experience. So how can we make a typical day better for our desired users using the product that we're developing for them? So what did we have in our design toolbox, let's say, in order to achieve this goal of improving user experience? Well, first of all, we were very fortunate to be able to partner with the Calgary Drop-In Center on this work. And so our key opportunity that we had was the opportunity to interact with frontline Calgary Drop-In Center staff, or DI staff as the Drop-In Center is known. And we had access to the Drop-In Center database for testing our data tool under the ethics agreement governing this research project. And that database contains approximately 40,000 different individuals, data spanning over 20 years. It has over 5.6 million entries. So the DI data environment was extremely rich. And we used the Power BI framework or tool for our development. And Power BI is a data visualization platform for programmers and data analysts. It's similar to Tableau. Some of you may have experience using Tableau in your organizations. And Power BI was chosen for its compatibility with the drop-in center IT systems. And the functionality of, while Power BI is a very powerful tool, its functionality is somewhat limited to the display and filtering of data, so you can't use it to alter the data in any way. And it also has the advantage of being able to connect to a wide range of data sources. So basically, the platform we had was one where you could query and display data, but it wasn't used to alter the data in any way. So the UX design process has a number of steps that you can utilize. And the four main ones that we used for this project was, number one, to perform a series of interviews with frontline staff. Number two, then synthesize or use what we learned from those interviews to synthesize or create a series of user experience design diagrams that kind of represent the experience, what our users were experiencing. Step three was a consultation or a collaborative design exercise with the frontline workers, known as a wall walk brainstorming exercise. And once we had performed that exercise and learned a ton from the frontline staff, step four was entering an iterative design process for the tool itself using agile development principles, which basically means presenting a first version of the tool to the users, getting them to use it, getting their feedback, and then quickly iterating the design and improving it based on that feedback. So the specific frontline group that we worked with on this project were the housing program managers at the drop-in center. And these are the managers in charge of the teams of caseworkers that implement the different housing programs at the DI. These individuals are responsible not just for managing staff, but also assigning clients to programs and working on particularly complex client cases. We conducted these interviews on November 8th, 2019, and we had 3 managers in attendance. They were 60 minutes long, and we collected 95 different notes based on that discussion. And once we had that sort of raw interview type data, we then used it to create a series of user-centric or user experience design diagrams to represent, again, a day in the life of those housing managers. There are a range of UX design diagram types, and we chose to focus on 3 of them for our exercise. The first one was something known as an affinity diagram, and this is where we take all of the notes that we collected during the interview and sort of create them or present them as kind of like sticky notes that we then group together according to themes. We also created what's known as a day in the life diagram, where we graphically represent how the activities of the user are spaced over both place and time. And the third type of diagram we generated was something called a Collaborators Diagram, which illustrates who the user interacts with and how those interactions occur. We then presented those diagrams in what's known as a wall walk workshop. And the reason why it's called a wall walk workshop is because you put up the diagrams either using large printouts or projectors on the walls of a meeting room or a conference room, and people walk around and look at them and provide feedback on them. And the first part of the diagram, or for the first part of the design exercise, everybody is given a pad of sticky notes and a marker, and they are asked to walk around, take a look at the diagrams, and add feedback in the form of putting up stickies. So if there's something missing, they can write it on a sticky, put it up there. If there's something that they like, they can put a smiley face on a sticky and put it next to the thing that they like. And for this stage, kind of crucially, no talking is allowed. So all the participants can walk around, put up their sticky notes, but no talking is allowed. And the reason for that is to is to make sure we're hearing all voices, because sometimes when you have a group brainstorming activity, there are strong personalities or people who are already naturally in leadership positions within an organization that tend to kind of take over sessions like that. And this sort of no talking, kind of quiet sticky note exercise really allowed everybody to provide their feedback in kind of a safer space. However, once the stickies were up and people had started providing their feedback, we did follow things up with a roundtable discussion where each participant was asked in turn to ask about the feedback they provided and give some thoughts about the diagrams. And that sort of then proceeded into a very more sort of free-flowing kind of brainstorming type discussion where we talked about how data tools could improve the user experience represented by our diagrams. So I'm going to show you pictures of a series or of the actual diagrams that we generated. I'm not going to spend too much time on this in the interest of time, because I have to fit in our 22-minute time slot. However, I am hoping that most of you will be watching this before the conference, in which case you can just pause the video and hopefully the resolution is good enough for you to just sort of stop and really kind of take a look at what is being represented on the diagram. The Affinity Diagram, as I mentioned, is basically a place where we take all the notes that we recorded in our interviews and to sort of group them by themes. So there was one of the themes was the need to understand individual clients or clients as individuals. Another sort of bigger theme was staff and client management, in which case you would break that into managing housing staff as well as triaging and managing certain specific clients. And there are a few other themes up on the board as well. And you can see that this is, you can already see where people have put up their own sticky notes and to provide their feedback on what they're seeing on this particular diagram. A day in the life diagram represents how people spend their time and where they are located. So we had three sort of yellow pillars representing where people are physically. They're either in meetings, they're in their office, or they're having one-on-one discussions. Underpinning all of this is sort of constant electronic email communication. People will be communicating and using their phones in all three of these areas. And certain activities span these different sort of physical location silos. So staff performance reviews are conducted in the office or in one-on-one discussions. Discussing clients and gathering information spans all three physical spaces. So does program design and evaluation. Team meetings were done just in the meeting environment. The reason why this was a valuable diagram is because it helped us understand where our users were physically. And that's important when developing a data tool, because then it tells us, it's like, okay, well, do we need to develop something that could potentially work on a phone, for example? Would a laptop be sufficient? Would a desktop computer be sufficient? And finally, we have a collaborators diagram, which represents how our users interact with each other and with sort of their main stakeholders. So within the middle, within this yellowish square, we have the three different types of managers we interviewed. We interviewed a diversion manager, what was known at the time as a catalyst program manager, and a case management manager. And they have a very sort of very tight links of communication among the three of them. And they then interact with a series of more external stakeholders, both within the Calgary Drop-In Center and outside of the organization as well. This is important because it allows us to get a little bit better idea of not only what kind of data they need, but who they are then presenting that data to. Who do they have to then sort of interact with regarding the decisions they make based on the data tool that we would be designing. And so what were some of the key themes that came out of this wall walk exercise? hands down, the managers felt the most important aspect of their job was referring clients to the right programs and being able to have a team conversation, a group conversation about a client is essential. And database decision making was already part of that process. So the managers involved, clearly understood that having the right data to base their decisions on was important. However, their access to the data was spread across a number of different locations. They would be consulting a couple different spreadsheets, a couple different computer programs. And so the information they needed was very spread out and needed to be centralized. And so what our data tool needed to deliver was, first and foremost, all the information they needed to be needed to be in one place and under one dashboard. Obviously, it had to be easy to use, and it had to be mobile. These managers are, sometimes they're collaborating with external organizations. They're moving often just within the Calgary Drop-In Center itself. So being able to run on a laptop and having, Wi-Fi access to the database was key. What I learned about the design process itself, just the value of this process, was that the staff was very happy to be engaged in the tool design. This was a very positive exercise. Everybody was really excited about participating and really wanted to provide input. And having the silence at the start of the wall walk exercise, as I mentioned, really helped all voices be heard and not just sort of the natural leaders in the group. And I learned that housing managers are very mobile and need to access data in many different locations, as I said in the previous slide. Collaboration and communication is key, but we didn't need to provide those tools. Staff was already very effectively using tools like email, WhatsApp, different chatting programs, and so that was not really a space that we needed to go into. And also, database decision making is already going on, so we didn't have to, in quotes, sell the benefits of using data. It was just accessing the data in the format that they needed was hard. Okay, so as you'll see in a second, the important features that we had to work into we had to add to the data tool based on the design process was, first of all, the ability to look up individual clients. So frontline workers need to understand individuals. They need to understand the person sitting across from them rather than sort of understanding what the overall population of the shelter might be doing. Staff wanted the ability to look at timeline graphs that showed how a particular person has been accessing shelter over time, interacting with counselors over time, and whether or not they've been barred from shelter access due to rule violations. But in addition to those graphics, they also wanted to have access to the actual case notes, because sometimes they needed to read the actual words written by other staff people so they can really understand the context of a person. And the tool needed to refresh itself every night, which was sort of some back-end work that we had to do with the IT department. And we ended up conducting 4 major design iterations for the data tool. And this was primarily enhancements to the user interface based on feedback from the housing managers. And these iterations were absolutely key. It was very, very important for staff adoption to make sure that you can adapt the tool based on their feedback to ensure that it's filling their needs. Meeting their needs. If we had just taken the first version of our tool that we developed, thrown it over the wall and walked away, the level of adoption for the data tool would have been greatly reduced. And now for a very quick demo of the tool itself. Okay, so here's a quick video of the tool interface. So all identifying information is blurred out. What we saw in the first part of the video, and I'll just rewind it a little bit, was the ability to look up an individual and then select them from a list. On the next pane, we have the ability to see the number of nights they have stayed in shelter, and with various, based on whether they're staying in day sleep or night sleep, and their intoxication level as observed by staff. As I mentioned, we have the ability to zoom in and out, so we can look at either their total stays by year, we can zoom in by month, and we can click on a month and zoom in and see their individual stays by days. The reason why this was important for the staff was because they wanted to be able to understand, okay, well, has this person been in shelter, this week, last week? Have they been around this month? So they need to be able to zoom in and see the activity that's really, really close to right now. But then they also want to zoom out and see the overall shelter activity for the person to see if they, do they have a long history of shelter use? Have they been gone for a while? Have they, recently showed up again? So that was very important. So this view helped with that. So you can sort of also zoom in and see a monthly breakdown over the course of many years. And you can see this particular person had some gaps in their visits to shelter. We can also look at the number of times they've interacted with counselors. We can see the number of times they've been barred from shelter for breaking rules. And then you can also click on a counselor's notes and bar's notes tab where you can see the actual notes collected for this particular person if you need more context about their situation. So to conclude, effective program delivery in shelter depends on effective frontline decision making, and data is just as important for frontline staff as it is for researchers and managers. However, the way that frontline staff needs to interact with data is unique, and so we feel there is real benefit to designing data tools specifically for frontline use, and we hope that the user experience design process that we have presented is interesting not just for the specifics of the tool that we've shared to you, but as a process that maybe you could use in your own shelters or your own context to develop your own tools. Thank you very much for listening. A big thank you to the Calgary Drop-In Center staff who interacted with us on this project, and I look forward to answering your questions.